Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for our November webinar Wednesday. My name is Sharon, and I'm with SIPA, your Colorado Government Authority, helping you get more information and services online and offering Colorado government's grant funding. In today's webinar, Rob and Andrew Schwartz with Cornflower Labs will be helping us all with designing intuitive user experiences for data collection and analysis. Before we get started, please go ahead and turn on captioning if you need or desire, and note that during this webinar you are muted. If you have any questions or would like to communicate with the presenters at any point during the webinar, please use the chat or the Q&A function. We'll unmute folks at the end after raising hands for any remaining questions you may have. We'll also have a poll question for you to answer during the presentation and a post-webinar survey, and we hope you'll provide your feedback. Please join me in welcoming Rob and Andrew. Thank you all for sharing your time and expertise. We appreciate it. Also on the call is SIPA's Sales and Marketing Director, Beth Justice, and Customer Success Director, Dwayne Tucker, if you have any questions for us. Thank you again for joining us today. With that, I will turn it over to our guests.
Hello and good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to our webinar today. We're excited to present to you about designing intuitive user experiences for users and data analysts. And this will be a participatory webinar, so we're hoping to get y'all's involvement also in the chat as we go through. So first, we'll present to you a little bit about the structure of this webinar. I want to make sure everyone's informed about how it's going to be presented. We'll talk to you all a little bit about us, what we do. We're going to go through 5 best practices for data entry, 3 best practices for data storage, 3 more best practices for data analysis, and then a kind of cheat sheet y'all can walk away with at the end of the webinar. So first, let's start out. We'll tell you guys a little bit about who we are about as a company, and then we'll keep moving forward. So let's kick it off with our approach to how we take on our projects. We are a Colorado company, and we are 1,000% passionate about working with government. We actually are made up of ex-government and ex-Silicon Valley. So in that sense, we're really hoping to combine the expertise that we brought in from the private sector and also this passion for making awesome things for Coloradans. That's encapsulated in our mission. We really want to help make Colorado and government and nonprofit clients be able to create and operate digital services at their highest level. Often that means a lot of our work is pulling from the most cutting edge research that's coming from other universities, it's coming from academic conferences, it's coming from international projects, and then learning from the top government teams within the federal level as well as at the state level in Colorado. Our work also ends up tending to involve an educational component for the folks that we work with. We're trying to empower everybody that we work with in government to become better at how they can do their jobs. In the end, if we teach someone how to do something, and that means they don't need to call us up in the future, that's a win. And that's something that we really strongly believe in. Our focus areas tend to be in the data, software, and analysis areas, as well as with touches of UX, UI, and accessibility. So we've worked with various government entities in the state of Colorado to design customizable portal and workflow management systems. We focus a lot on the user experience, both for internal state government, local government, and other government entities, but also the public. So we're trying to make sure it's an easy experience for the public to use these systems. We've done modernization projects, those software projects and data projects where we're taking older systems, moving them forward into 2025. We've also worked with these, user experience improvements in terms of analyses. So we've just analyzed previous systems, running through the qualities of what those systems are and understanding where those pain points might be for users on both ends of that. Lastly, we've worked in these digital design, visualization, GIS, analysis, and project management areas. So also just helping folks get a better hands on their own data or often managing their own tech projects in a more thorough way. That means sometimes Scrum and Agile training, and also means sometimes just bringing folks other sides of their applications that maybe they're not familiar with that they can improve and make more effective. We've worked with CDPHE over the past few years in terms of architecting and modernizing some of their previous systems. This has meant moving software into the cloud. So for AWS software, we've done development where we've been able to make it more efficient, cheaper, and also easier to manage. We have been one of the first groups, if not the first group, in the state of Colorado state government to launch a public-facing Gen AI chatbot system. So we were able to work closely with OIT, CDO, and CDPHE to help make sure that this was a success. And then we've also done really intensive form design for public users for some of the previous, one of the previous House bills that came out for clean water in schools. And this was a fantastic project where we actually did user testing with public users, including nurses. Or sorry, this is not for nurses, this was in schools. So we ended up basically getting these people on the phone and doing user experience tests with them as we were developing these forms. We've also done projects for SIPA directly, including a usability and accessibility analysis of the MyBiz Colorado website. We've worked with the University of Colorado to develop and deploy data pipelines and applications for their systems. So also greenfield projects and brownfield projects in order to help move data around within their own research. With DOLA, we have launched this project from scratch to make the entire intergovernmental platform to handle compliance for these specific House and Senate bills for land use compliance. And that's been something that has also involved extensive form design, testing, and improvement in terms of making sure those forms really click for different governments. And with Jefferson County, we're working right now on implementing and designing a GIS dashboard for county project visualizations for the public. And this is only for the Colorado work we do. We've had experiences also leading projects for other universities, including MIT, over the past 2 years. And then we've also been very lucky to have connections with other entities outside of Colorado, including around the world. So we've ended up being able to learn a lot about some of these best practices from other sites as well. One thing to keep in mind is Colorado is probably somewhere in the middle in terms of overall digitalization compared to the rest of the planet. Certainly in terms of being able to submit forms online, to interact with the government online, it's pretty far along, but maybe it's not as far along as some other countries like Estonia. So there's always best practices that we can pull from in terms of what's happening in other places in the world as well. Right on. Now we're going to talk about data entry, and we're coming up our first participatory element of this webinar. So we're going to go over what is data entry and run through some best practices. But first, we want to hear what is the worst data you've ever dealt with. And so you can feel free to paste something in the chat. We are really curious to see what the responses are, talk through them a bit, and then keep moving. So I'm going to give this one a minute or two, and we'll see if these answers start coming in. And yeah, we're curious to hear what folks' thoughts are. Alrighty, seeing some responses here. We got biosolids data reported in PDFs. This is a very mind-reading kind of response because we are talking about PDFs in this presentation. That's fantastic. Your own health data, price books in Excel, still learning, police officer enforcement activity data, address. Oh man, address data is wild. Oh yeah, still learn. Awesome. Okay. Hidden characters from copy paste. Waveforms of voice recordings. This is fantastic. Yeah, great. These are great responses. Really good. All right, we'll give this another minute, but yeah, this is so cool to hear. Definitely a range of outputs. Really, really cool. All right, so I think we're gonna keep moving. Um, Great to see that incident data. An incident can vary so much. Yeah, fantastic. Cool. All right, so we're gonna keep rolling, but this is again really, really good. Thanks for putting these in here. We got more opportunities to engage, so we're excited to hear from y'all as well as we go through. Um, But before we're going to even start talking about this question of data entry, I want to hit y'all with this quote to start out with, which is from Charles Babbage, who's one of the let's say ancestors of the development of the computer, the modern computer, right? And he has this quote that I like a lot, that I think about frequently when I'm dealing with data entry processes. It says, "On 2 occasions I've been asked, 'Pray, Mr. Babbage, if you put into the machine wrong figures, will the right answers come out?'" And his response is just general confusion, the way that people talked 3 centuries ago. I'm not able rightly to apprehend the kind of confusion of ideas that could provoke such a question, which I think is historical English for what a crazy question. But at the same time, sometimes we ask ourselves this kind of question, where sometimes people put in wrong data and we expect to get, real solutions out, real analyses out, real visualizations out. And it's really tough. It's really tough to start when you don't have good data at the front. So that's where we're going to start off this presentation, is talking about getting that data in at the beginning of your data entry process. So let's talk about what is data entry, which might seem a little bit of a basic question, but philosophically, it's important to understand it's coming from users. And I know that often that relationship can be a little bit of antagonistic, but also supportive when you're dealing with users who put in something and you're like, what is this? What is getting into my system? But in the end, it's the user who is the expert here, because we're making a partnership with users. We need to make sure that when a user is interacting with this form, they're in the best possible situation to give you the data that you're looking for. So in the end, you're also relying on the expertise of that user. And this counts for everything. And it counts for compliance processes, it counts for tax processes, it counts for all the things that people really don't like to fill out. But in the end, you're still going to get into a partnership with that user and you want them to provide the best data possible. So with that in mind, I think that's where we really want to start out with understanding how we see users as a part of our data entry design processes. And it's tough because I know sometimes you deal with the public and you get responses that are confusing, surprising, not what you expected, not what you were looking for. But just remembering that this partnership is core to getting good data in is something that can lead to really, really good data entry processes. All right, we're going to have a next share out, which is what is your level of experience in form and data pipeline design? And this one's going to be a kind of pop up on your screen. So feel free to jump in here and give it a rating too.
And those ratings go from 1 to 5, from very experienced to not experienced at all. And that's, obviously completely subjective. Rob, when you're working with clients, what do you find is typically kind of the range that people are at that you're working with?
I mean, it really depends. I think one thing that I really want to emphasize is everybody has solid intuitive knowledge of whatever business process they're working with. And that goes for people who have a good technical background, who have zero technical background. You've seen how your users behave, you've seen how your data works. Like, you know something that I definitely don't coming in from this side. So I think it's a mix. This makes sense that we're seeing about three, but I've seen folks who would put themselves at a 4 or 5, but they're actually really quite good at knowing something that's going to help make their process excellent. So I think there's something for everybody when you're dealing with this kind of process.
Thank you all for your responses.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right, well, we're going to keep moving and talk a little bit about this first data entry best practice, which is going to be a little bit of a strange one to start with because this actually doesn't seem to have anything to do with data at the beginning, but it does. And this is to use a cover page when you're designing a form. And the cover page doesn't necessarily have to be something in depth, but it's trying to answer some basic questions, including who should be completing the form, what do they need to complete the form, what happens after they submit the form, and when is the form due if there's a deadline. And in this specific case, this is pulled from some of our work that we've done with DOLA. The reason that we put these at the beginning of forms is because we want the users who are the right users to be using that form to be able to succeed when they're filling out this form. This first question, who should complete this form, is going to help it so that you don't have users who don't actually need to fill out the form waste time on filling something out, because this happens when users don't really know if they should be filling out a form or not. What do I need to complete this form can help users not interrupt themselves when they're filling out a form. And you've probably seen this when you're doing taxes, when you're filling out any kind of paperwork that requires you to deal with documentation that you have stored somewhere. You're going to need to go get that documentation or find it to be able to fill out that form. But in terms of making this experience fast and simple for the user, as you can tell them up front, you're going to need a passport. You're going to need something that's printed out from 2 years ago. They're going to be able to complete this form probably with more accuracy as well, because they're not going to lose their train of thought as they're going through it. What happens after I submit this form is a question of trust. If you're asking your user to participate in something, but they're not really sure how much they want to spend time on it, telling them what happens and what your data is going for, what it's being used towards in terms of your own government, can help them make that choice to participate more fully in that interaction. And when does this form due? Simple stuff, but often, you want to communicate, hey, there is a deadline. Please make sure you get this in by a certain point. And this can help for users who also don't have a lot of time. If they need to look at a form, but they don't really know what to do, giving them this kind of cover sheet, which can just be a few paragraphs that go before the form or on the first page of the form, can help them understand what next steps to take. Another benefit of this, when we talk about usability, it's divided up into several different factors, but one of the ones that is often provided, and this is from Nielsen Norman, they're a usability research group, they mention learnability as one of these key concepts here. And if you have multiple forms that are following the same standard, at the beginning of each form, there are these explanations of who, what happens afterwards, and when is this form due, they're going to feel comfortable entering into a new form process every time they take on a new form from your government entity. And that learnability can help users develop the confidence to be able to interact in a more trusting and more easy way with your government forms as well. We're going to move on to the second one, and this one is probably the nutshell that I think is hardest to crack in a lot of these form processes, is validate data as early as possible when you're getting it in. And this is tough if you're dealing with paper forms, and I understand that. But when it comes to digital forms, also these capabilities have progressed immensely. And I'm talking about Google Forms to some extent, but even more than Google Forms at this point. We worked with an open source form design system called Vueform, Vueform. that has basically everything that you could want and more in terms of validation. And we're talking things that are not just required and not required, which is a basic level where you want to make sure people are putting that in, but data types that include complex data types, even using regex, which is a kind of standardization that you can use in terms of making people putting the right characters, the right letters, the right symbols in a certain way in a form input. Um, and then also allowing multiple options, conditional logic between sections of the form, displaying or not displaying something, requiring a minimum or maximum number of options selected. So let's say you only want 2 out of 5 selected, these kind of restrictions. In 2025, this kind of functionality is available in form design systems, and to the extent possible, making this validated early is something that's a benefit for you and it's a benefit for your users. Mainly because you're preventing your users from making a mistake early on. And you've probably seen this. Sometimes people submit something and it gets rejected the minute it lands in terms of your workflow and your evaluation flow of what kind of submissions look like. And that's a it's painful for the user, it's painful for your employees, it's painful for everybody involved because that could have been prevented with better validation up front. So again, trying to help that not happening is something that can help that trust between your government and your users, but it can also help the satisfaction of your users and the folks who are working in your government to put better validation at the very start. Also, if you're able to break up your form into sections, this can help, again, build that confidence in your users that they're completing the first section, they're feeling really good about, hey, I've put in my name, maybe some personal information that's super small, but it's validated because it's required, and then they're ready to take on a harder task. Often when we talk about form design, again, coming from Nielsen Norman, they talk about it as a kind of bank of trust. And you're trying to build up this bank of trust with users and get them through this form. And so starting out with easy validation, an easy section to start out, can help them progress through the rest of the form and complete it. Simplifying forms. This one is also a little bit of a hot button topic, and I think it's often because we perceive stakeholder conflict going on here, right? Maybe there's somebody within your government who says, let's add another question. I want to know X. And then you're thinking of the user and they're going to say, oh, another question. What am I doing with this data? Where is it going? Or maybe there's another group inside of your organization who says, I want to make sure we're speeding up the amount of time it takes for forms to be submitted. How do you decide, right? How do you figure out what you're going to do with this form in terms of adding or removing questions? Um, this is another reference from Nielsen Norman. They do a lot of work with forms, so we ended up citing them a lot in this presentation, but also we follow a lot of the 18F practices as well, various other sources on the internet. But if you want to also go look for this link, it's a good one. But they recommend 3 questions, which is why is this information needed? How will the data be used? And how does the information support user or business goals? And you may already know that you collect things in your form that you don't use. And I have seen this on some forms before in various departments. And this is something that it's hard to let go of because you will say, but what if this analysis happens in the future? Like, I'd really like to know. But eventually, that form can become 18 pages long, and then you might not be reaching any of your goals because you're not going to have the right number of users fill it out, or they're all optional, and so users are just going to skip it, and the data won't be the quality you're trying to make. Um, so in the end, this is a balance, right? You're trying to be able to figure out how you can reach those goals that your business needs to make or your organization needs to make without, let's say, making that user experience really difficult. In this inset box here, I wanted to provide an example. You can do this. It is possible to simplify forms often in a radical way, reducing, in this case, from 29 to 13 pages. Um, so, I mean, bear in mind your users will increase their trust if they are understanding what's happening with their data. If you can't remove it, at least explaining why it's required. But at the same time, if you can remove it, that's even better in terms of making that experience as fast and fluid as possible. There's also this question of user fatigue. So as you're going through, if the user is saying, okay, step 5 of 18, the likelihood that they're really going to go through with it, probably not very high. And so that can also help them get over that activation energy of submitting the form. I'm going to check the chat real quick just because I know there's messages in here. Um, Other comments. Great, great. Tell the user upfront how many sections there are. This is a fantastic one. Yeah, I think in the end we had to cut down the number of best practices in this section. But you can see these on some of the modern form designs where it has a panel that says, you're in section 1, there are 6 sections. Or you're in section 1 and you're moving to section 2 and section 3 is, whatever section. And even adding titles in those sections can help understand preparing users for what they're about to see next. If I guess I can riff on this point about telling the users how many sections there are up front, one thing that's an important thing to keep in mind is if you have section logic that changes how different sections interact with each other, usually it's best not to have a section appear or disappear based on that section logic. Because if so, they're going to start with 4 sections and they might click something in section 2 and then get 6 sections or 8 sections. So to the extent possible, not using conditional logic for the number of sections is something that we try to stick to because it adds a lot of confusion and kind of unpleasant surprises, let's say, for users at points. All right, I'm going to keep rolling. We have 2 more on the data entry side, and then we have, I think, more participatory questions. So this principle is called the once only principle. I'm guessing some folks have heard about it here who do design work, and maybe you have just kind of picked up on it before. But this is a concept that when interacting with the government, users should only have to enter in their data once, which is a little bit of a concept that I think is undervalued in some ways because it can be used very creatively. And in terms of applications here, this could mean if you entered in some value last year, why doesn't your form have that value pre-populated this year? Or if you sent your address data in when you were registering for your business, why isn't this address data copied to another version of a form that's for related information about your business? Um, a lot of this system will work based on attaching data to specific users. So one thing to keep in mind here is you usually need to have a user ID, an email, a kind of registration token that was attached in order to be able to pull data into the right form for that next user. But the goals and the outcomes here are powerful. In the end, we're preventing errors, which can range from unpleasant errors to really deeply unsatisfying errors. Anything from messing up the email address twice or the address twice to accidentally perjuring yourself when you're entering data in 2 different places, but you didn't remember what it was in the first case. All the way to saving users time as well. And this means if they're going to fill out this form for the second year, but nothing's probably changed, at least they can skip a section of the form. And then we also have making it so more processes can be launched on an automated basis. And this is tied to another digital government concept called the no-stop shop, which is a play on words of the one-stop shop, which is a lot of these government processes that we participate in can probably be launched from the office by the time it's needed instead of by the user when they need it. And so this can be for renewals, requests, updates. It can be as simple as sending a form and saying, okay, here's our data. Does this seem right or not? Please just let us know yes or no. Or it could be if there's something that needs to be renewed and it doesn't have a cost, just doing the renewal and then sending a renewal over to the user. So again, it's very powerful keeping this data in hand and understanding that maybe it doesn't need to be entered in multiple times. Maybe it could just be entered in once. And then the last one I wanted to bring up, and maybe tackling this from a different angle than I think we usually talk about, is using responsive design. And that just means designing for different modalities in terms of that interaction. So usually the 2 most popular ones are the smartphone and the tablet, or sorry, the smartphone and the laptop, but also the tablet comes in the middle there. And there's other modalities too, like the smartwatch, but I don't think most people are trying to fill out forms on the smartwatch these days. In terms of completing this interaction, the goal here is not necessarily to give a single user more options, but it can be, right? And we've done user interviews with Coloradans before, understanding when do they use this system, what would trigger them to launch this kind of process in their daily life or their week or their month. And often the users will respond, well, I use my smartphone after I come home from work, or I use it in the morning, but I use my laptop at a different time of day. And this is because we find ourselves not carrying around a laptop all the time, right? We're going to be able to complete some process when we have a few spare minutes waiting in line, maybe on public transportation, something like that. So making the form design responsive can actually just mean giving more space in someone's life to fill out this form, which it might not be something that kind of comes to mind, but because we tie the use of devices to specific times in our day, it might be something that gives users more opportunities to complete that process. And of course, also sometimes users don't have access to these technologies, right? You might only have a smartphone but not a laptop, or you might only be able to go to the public library to fill out some of these forms, right? So we want to make sure that it's designed for also those groups of users so they can be able to get access as well. And again, the outcome here is you're going to be able to work in a partnership with your user in a better way. You're meeting them in terms of their needs and requirements, and you're bringing the technology up to that level where they're going to be able to interact with it as easily as possible. All right, we're gonna hit this next share out, which is what are some unusual responses you have seen when users fill out your forms? And I guess I'll share out mine very briefly, but I'm very curious to see what also the other responses are. When I was working at CDPHE during the COVID pandemic, which was um, a lot of these test processing systems, we had one user who was very young who entered in a unicorn emoji in the first name of her response. which caused the system to go pretty haywire because no one was expecting emojis to be entered in the first name and last name fields. So yeah, it was a kind of a cute error, but at the same time, surprising, unusual. All right, we got some coming in on a form where we think we are just asking for the business name. Some users put in a long description of their business instead. Interesting. Interesting. Yep. Users trying to crack the form by entering coding into specific fields. Yeah. Yeah, there's always that. Yep. There's always that 1% of hyper motivated users that start doing unusual things, and that's always interesting to deal with for sure. Yeah, I guess in both of these kind of topics, I can talk about it briefly. I think on the business name question, that's super interesting, and I'm also curious if you had the chance to speak with some of those users, or if they're just not reading it, if they're surprised by it. I mean, because again, there's always that question. You could restrict it, right? You could put a length limit on there, but I don't think that's really the problem. There's more of a question of understanding of what they're hoping to put in there. Maybe it's more of a communication question. Um, and then this one here, trying to crack the form by entering coding the specific fields. Yeah, we've seen this. I mean, sometimes the interaction between the front end and the API is a loose coupling, and you start seeing people who try to figure out how they can submit different API responses because they're not actually using the front end anymore to code it up. So, yeah, that is interesting. That's I think more of just trying to, you know, increase the integrity of your backend. But yeah, absolutely relevant. Get scammers trying to request cryptocurrency. Awesome. Yep. Yeah, that's yeah. When these things are open to the public, sometimes you do get that kind of information in there too. And a lot of our institute users, when they ask for their agency organization, some put agencies, some division, some something even more specific, like a program. Oh, interesting. Yeah, we've done this on some of the Dola forms too by just restricting, basically coming up with an extensive list of all the possibilities and then making sure that that's updated consistently. So they have to select from a drop down. But in the end, that's another maintenance task. So you really want to make sure that maintenance task is being followed up on. Because the frustration is if you're not in that list, then you're really kind of, you don't have any other option. And that's tough. And this one too. I've seen an oh, I don't know what this is. I'm sorry. Um,
None of your
Same.
business.
None
Exactly.
of your business. Thank you. Awesome. Great. Yeah, fantastic. Cool. Great to hear from these. All right, so we're going to practice, or we're going to move forward a little bit to the three best practices for data storage. Um, the famous PDF comment. We're going to start off with this one, and then move to these two questions about hosting the database on a server and using data warehouses. And for some of y'all, you're probably familiar with some of these points too, but we're going to hope to add in that little user-centered spin on top of this to understand why it's really important to do these things as well. All right, here's this first one, which is using PDFs as a data element, not as a data storage. So this is kind of a sample case we're going to give you about, let's say it's a request for funding, right? And you have these columns: date submitted, account amount requested, narrative description, date reviewed, request accepted, and link to the PDF. And this is not a terrible structure in terms of getting this data firsthand because you're linking to the PDF. The PDF is going to be, let's say, the reference that you're going to use to prove, okay, you got an application, you know, somebody wrote it, maybe somebody filled out a form and it's a printout, maybe it's a scan. Hopefully it's not a scan, but let's see. Sometimes there is the need for that analog kind of request. But in the end, your data analyst is not going to go to your PDF and try to pull out the data from the PDF, do the data analysis. And the reasons for this are multiple, but mainly the biggest one is you can't really do an automated analysis of a bunch of these PDFs quickly. And that's because there's sometimes OCR problems. There's PDF data limitations in terms of line breaks, copying text out, text overflowing between pages. And it's not consistent, right? When you want to give somebody an analysis to make, if they're going to have to go through 200 PDFs to figure out how to pull out each element, that's probably not good use of their time either in terms of that versus working with the database. So you're moving basically from this kind of manual data analysis process to an automated one. So our recommendation is through and through, if you can, do not do your data analysis in the PDFs. Get that information out of the PDFs, put it in a table, and link to those PDFs. Um, Fillable PDFs can be good for getting that information out as a kind of way to put data into a form, but they really work badly on mobile devices, fillable PDFs. So that's something to keep in mind. They are not kind of the preferred solution in terms of dealing with these kind of questions. And the validation on them is not as good as what you can do in web platforms. So just something to keep in mind. Um, Putting your database on a server. This one I know is often a little bit difficult because we're talking sometimes about business processes that are owned by even sometimes one staff member. And you're saying, okay, like, I mean, they've got it, they're managing it, they're keeping hold of their own database, and they've got it under control, which is, it's pretty good. Sometimes that can work. But the problem is often when you're trying to send information between analysts and owners of the data, when you're trying to do analysis that involves multiple units or other users, you get to the point of you have multiple copies of this database. If it's a file, then you're sending the file to somebody else. If it's a spreadsheet, yeah, maybe it's online, but at the same time, if you're making those changes, are people downloading that spreadsheet and then making the analysis, or are they really pulling from that spreadsheet? And this problem of creating a single source of truth, it limits the possibilities you can use a database for, because that means if you have one source of truth, you can have different contributors, you can have different analysts, and they're all looking at the same thing at once, which is really powerful. It reduces that kind of miscommunication between team members. It also makes it, if you have different systems that are contributing to the same system, users can get their data pulled out as well in a routine way that's going to enable them all to connect to that same source of truth also. Um, this can also help your team's level of comfort and education in terms of being able to make a SQL query, being able to make a visualization. We've worked with a lot of folks who say, yeah, I deal with a lot of data, but I'm not comfortable yet with writing a SQL query. And we want to make sure people can get there because in the end, when you have the power of saying, okay, I know what I want to find out and I can go find it with your own tools without needing to call somebody up and you're feeling pretty capable about doing that on your own, that means that your whole team is probably going to be more satisfied with their work because they're going to be able to achieve that extra step of being able to understand what they're really dealing with, what they really have on hand. And so that can be a powerful outcome of being able to put all this data on one server, one source of truth, and being able to have different team members access it. This last one we're going to talk about is data warehouses. And this one is also, for some folks, it's really common. For some folks, it's a stretch goal. Um, but what we're talking about is pulling in different data from different sources. Often there's a kind of cleaning process, sometimes no. And you're being able to analyze this data at different levels, potentially with pre-configured ways of analyzing the data, potentially with anonymization as a part of this process, revealing certain parts of the data to certain members, certain parts of the data to other members who might need to do a data analysis. One of the big benefits of this kind of process is it often allows the data analysts and the system maintainers to decouple their work. It's not necessary as a data analyst that you need to know everything about how the system is functioning. Maybe you want to know a lot about it, but not necessarily all of it. But when you're breaking this off and you're creating a space for data analysts and you're creating a space for the system itself, you're able to fully decouple those two questions. Also, you're able to reduce risk. And the reason that you're able to reduce risk is because you have a lot of this data that maybe you don't necessarily know you want to share with other parts of your organization or with other individuals in your system. If you're creating these custom ways of viewing the data, that means you can also anonymize, block out, remove certain parts of that data when you're showing it to them, instead of necessarily having them sign a data agreement that says, I'm not going to reveal it. So that can help in terms of your organization's risk posture, reducing that kind of pressure. And then also you're able to learn from other data sources. This can mean you have a data integration with a completely different data source that's being pulled into your data. Yeah, it's pulled into your data warehouse, allowing you to augment how you're doing your work as well. So again, it's making you more powerful, making you more able to understand what you have on hand. And also if you're seeing trends or patterns from your user, making you better able to react to those, which is again very powerful in terms of what you're providing services and how you're providing services to your eventual users as well. So these ones are more about this internal part of the system, moving from data entry into this data storage questions, and we're going to move all the way out to the end in terms of that data analysis best practices as well. So I'm going to move this one over also to the share out. What are some of the data challenges you've experienced in the past? If you want to jump in, also put these in the chat. Yeah, curious to hear what folks have been facing as well as some of the challenges you identified. And by the way, these responses are also very high level. And in terms of you've recognized what the problem is and you're kind of conceiving it and thinking it over in your head is also a really good sign. Often when we meet with folks who are working directly with data, they already know exactly what their problems are. They have some other ideas maybe they haven't fully explored, and it's really good to be able to work with them and kind of understand, yeah, these are these challenges that they've already seen. Because often those pain points are some of the most, let's say, crucial bits just to get some of these questions unblocked. Duplicate fields, like multiple ways to record a county. And yeah, addresses are wild. I was going to mention this, but there is a lot of standardization you can do with addresses. Counties in particular are really interesting because they don't necessarily match up one-to-one with zip codes, but there are best practices in this area too to make the standardization for addresses much, much more, let's say, smooth. But yeah. Um, for some people, learning the data can be a challenge. Yeah, we're actually going to talk about that one going up. So this is awesome. Spot on. The two different apostrophes, governance, when, how, who can change data, fields multiplying because fields are added for very specific things without standardization or consolidation of similar fields. Yeah, removing, exactly. Yep. Yeah, removing or consolidating is also, that's a huge question. Date time, always date time. Yeah, we always use UTC for internal purposes in terms of the database date time storage. And then we tell our data analysts, hey, it's in UTC, you're gonna have to make this conversion. And then from the front end, it's all presented in Colorado time because we got to the point where there were so many libraries that were expecting UTC as this default that we were just running into this kind of overflow of like, okay, now what? We translated the hours like 8 hours forward, and we're translating again 8 hours forward. At a certain point, you just need to standardize that too. But yeah, making that decision upfront can help a lot. Yeah. Um, cool. All right, well, let's keep moving. Three best practices for data analysis. And these first two are more, let's say, data artifacts, but they also should really be living inside of your system. They should be alive in terms of what you're maintaining as a part of your database. And this last one is going to be more of this question of data governance, which I think we'll dive into briefly. So this first one is generating entity relationship diagrams. You may have seen one of these before. This is for the little case that we came up with earlier in these slides about you have this request for funding and you want to get information about each one of these tables. Um, Entity relationship diagrams simply show the connection between the different tables in your database. And often, as a data analyst, the first question you'll have is, what is this? And the second question you'll have is, okay, now what are the other parts of it? And you can drill all the way down from the entire database to figuring out the schemas, then moving down to the tables, and moving down to what are the specific columns within each one of these tables and their properties, right? But if you don't have one of these on hand, it's going to be really hard to communicate what kind of data is in your database. So this is just something that can help data analysts, data visualization specialists get their feet wet in terms of understanding where do you start. And this is not just for people who are starting out with your database. It can also be for you in 8 months. Because we've done this a lot where we develop something and we say, okay, it's pretty good. I'm going to go work on another part of the system. And then in 8 months, you have to come back to the other part of that system that you're working on originally. You're going to want to know what you were doing then too. So this documentation is just not, it's not for necessarily users, it's for everybody. It's for everybody to keep track of what's happening in their system. The good news is this can often be generated automatically. So if you do have a system where you're working with a relatively standardized SQL implementation, for example, SSMS, or sorry, SSMS is the tool, but you say Microsoft SQL, um, MySQL, MariaDB, these kind of libraries, there's something you can plug into your system to be able to generate this. So you should be able to get a hold of one of these diagrams relatively easily. And to the extent possible, keeping it updated and in a centralized location is really beneficial. This is something we're actually putting into one of our build pipelines right now in one of our projects to just spit out a new ERD every time we do the build pipeline. So then folks are going to understand, okay, if we made a schema change, they'll see it. They'll know what's been happening inside of that system too. Um, this also means it's easier to design the data queries, and this is a general kind of comment, but at the same time, I know we're seeing this kind of rise of AI being able to ingest things, and if you wanted AI to ingest your data schema and help you design queries, that is, I think, an excellent use of being able to have a chatbot or a kind of LLM type system be able to give you responses about what you're currently dealing with in terms of your own database schema. Granted, this is not your data, this is just your schema, and it can still help you with that kind of question, how to design a query that's efficient, or it's going to help you answer the question you're trying to answer. This next one is a data dictionary, which is similar concept in that it also can tell you information about what's inside each one of these columns. But the other part that it does, and this is the biggest part, is it has a description of what's in that column. And again, this can be the nut that you can't crack when you sometimes get like an old system or you inherit a system or you get access to a system you know nothing about and you get column names that are like SFM underscore 12. And you think to yourself, oh goodness, I have no idea what an SFM underscore 12 is. And you have to go through and you have to go look at how it connects to the rest of the data. And you have to go figure out what's actually in that data. And then you can finally make an educated guess about what you think that it is. But maybe there's other criteria you're missing, right? But if you just keep track of your descriptions of your columns inside of your database or as a part of your code or as a part of your project, it's going to make this question not even a question you have to ask. You'll just pull up your data dictionary and you'll know. Um, so this is something that can be auto-generated in some cases. If you have these column labels that are attached to your data in some way, yes, you can generate these automatically. In general, it's really good for folks who are working on your database to have to make sure that when they're creating a new column, it needs to have a column description, because then you won't have these kind of questions later on about, wait, what happened to my column? What is this? What is this mystery column that's been added to my table? And this example column can also be generated that gives you an example of what one of the responses can be. Because often, for example, when you have an enumeration, right, you might want to understand, does it start at 0? Does it start at 1? Are these strings? Maybe you just want to look at this really briefly and figure out which column is the one that has the name of the project, right? So this can help at a glance understand what's going on with your system as well. And again, it can help new people, it can help old people on the project. It can help just looking back at the same project several months out. And then one side benefit, and I'm not sure how many folks on this call are running one of these, but if you have an open data portal, this bit can help users who know nothing about your database be able to use it. So this can be the difference between can't use it and can use it in terms of an open data portal, and that can be transformative as well if you want to be able to provide that kind of access to the folks that you're serving also. Next, and this is the last best practice we're going to talk about in terms of data analysis, which is store related data in your database. And this one is easier said than done. It's a mix of data governance questions, and it's also a mix of empowerment in terms of getting users who maybe aren't familiar with using SQL or using databases to get their hands dirty. And we're actually doing this in one of our projects too right now. With Dola, we're helping some of these users get access to a specific part of the database where they can store some of their related data in order to make sure it's connecting properly to the rest of the data set. And in the end, we're trying to get ahead of this problem where someone says, yeah, I log into the database, I download my copy, and then I go do my analysis, which is pretty good sometimes. But then if something changes in the database, it's going to screw up everything else that's connected to it. And that's in their own individual data pipeline, which is no longer connected to the source of truth, right? So the more that you can have folks get their sort of walled garden where they can make their own data inputs, they can add information, right? Maybe it's a separate table, maybe it's a view, and they're being able to modify it again in this centralized spot where everything's connected, the less you're going to have these kind of questions of, hey, somebody broke my data pipeline, because that data pipeline is going to live in the same database, right? And this can mean also you're dealing with user level accounts. You could say, I'm empowering this person who does internal approvals to be able to insert or upload their internal approval. Sometimes that means eventually it's going to get built out into the interface, right? We'll say, okay, it lives in the database, great, we're going to connect this to the front end, then you can modify that in the front end too. But in the end, that kind of process means that they're never going to be working with their own spreadsheet that's over in left field and saying, okay, but I got new inputs in the database, but I never was able to make an approval for it. But the reason they weren't able to do that because those things aren't connected, right? And this manual data matching is can be on a small scale. It can also be on the hundreds of thousands of rows scale. And you start seeing then tools being used for purposes they're not really built for. Like you have Excel files that have crazy numbers of rows that take forever to load, and they can't connect to things. Like that's the moment where it's like, all right, you got a database, that has all the power that you're going to want behind it. You can be able to do these larger scale analyses too and bring people into the fold. Again, it requires training, it requires getting folks up to that level, but give them that power and that ability and that responsibility to be able to get their data where the rest of the data is can be really powerful. So, highly recommended if you're able to do it. All right, we got another share out, which is some of these data visualizations or analyses you would like to create one day that you're thinking over. And then we have basically the closing part of the presentation and questions. Sorry about that. Oh, this one's a great one. Predictions about where we should focus our efforts based on historical and recent data. Yeah, predictive analysis is wild. Like that is often one of the goals that you can get to when you really have everything else lined up and you're able to trust your data sources. You can do inferential queries about your past data. You can do descriptive queries about your past data, then predictive. Yeah, that's fantastic. Really nice. Awesome. I'll keep one eye on the chat, but I'll also keep moving here. We're going to talk about the last section here, which is our messy data cheat sheet. And this is like they have the fire extinguishers in the little boxes where you're supposed to break the glass in case there's an emergency. This is more in line with that kind of recommendation than a best practices recommendation. This is more of, okay, it's too late. You have a bunch of messy data. How do we move forward? And let's talk about that because it's a real case. It's important to consider. Um, so the first question we would start with, let's say you have a table and you trust some of your columns, you don't really know which ones you should be using, is identifying which is the most important current data that you need for your business needs, right, inside of your organization. And sometimes that can be two columns because the need is I want to make a map of participating jurisdictions and figure out how many of them have how many submissions per jurisdiction. Great. Then maybe all you need is the ID column and the jurisdiction column and you're set. Or it can be something very detailed where you want to understand, okay, how often, how many times, are they doing it repeatedly, these kind of things. Then maybe you need like 5 or 6 columns and you want to break it out across different dimensions and you're going to need even more columns, right? So it depends on the initial question. What do you actually need to do? I'm going to jump in the chat real quick. You have organizing a visualization based on an object in Salesforce on a dashboard by a field in a different object. Yep. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Cool. Got it. Different data sources. Yep. Connecting them together and making visualization. Fantastic. Yeah, counties are a challenge. Absolutely. Um, Great. So after you, jumping back to the slide, after you've identified those most important current data columns, you want to identify the data quality of that column. This can often be almost impossible to do on a comprehensive basis. If you have 10,000 entries, you're never going to be able to say with precision, I have a 97.8% data accuracy in my column. And also the question of accuracy is contested, right? Are you understanding that the information is accurate as the user intended to enter it? Are you understanding that the information is accurate as it actually is? Right? Because maybe all the users thought they entered in the right thing, but in the end, it wasn't what you were asking. You want to be able to measure this. Like, what percent of these, even if you can't measure it, estimating it, what do you think the percent of these that are actually accurate? Because that'll influence your ability to move forward with an analysis or also to remediate this data if you can. And sometimes it's lost. It happens. Sometimes there was not a required field and it should have been required, or there was no restriction on what people could have entered and somebody entered in negative numbers and you might just never know. And that's again why we talk about these best practices in terms of validation up front, because it can help save that kind of heartache later on in terms of getting the data that you were hoping to get. Um, Going to this third step, understand what is causing the problem. With your team, and if there's an IT department or an external contractor who's managing that system, as you can, having a frank conversation about where is this coming from is really helpful. I mean, without blame, just trying to understand how can you improve it moving forward, and how can you have that kind of mindset of constantly improving, just identifying it. Where's the bug? And sometimes it can be anywhere from the beginning of the system should have been required, but it's not, to partway through the system, the data gets corrupted, and then we're feeling, okay, maybe this is not working properly on the back end part of the system. Maybe it's being overwritten. There can be all kinds of problems like this that are causing your data to not have a good data quality. So being able to work with the other stakeholders, if there are those, to understand it can be really helpful. Again, without judgment, just trying to move forward to a better data quality in the end. Um, Designing the fix. Ideally, you're going to have a really well identified problem. You can test out, see if your fix works. If that's for validation, we recommend go test it with users. Go see if users are reacting in the way that you're hoping. They don't necessarily need to be many users. They can also be users that are working with your forms relatively often or your systems relatively often and want to participate and give you more feedback. But to the extent that you're making front end changes, it's great to test them with the users. That's a best practice, and we'd highly recommend that. But technical fixes should also be tested, right? We'll make sure that technical fix is really causing the output that you're hoping for. The fifth one, and this is if possible, because in many cases it's not possible, is try to complete that data remediation. So if you can, right? And sometimes with dollars, dates, kind of numeric formats that have specific categories that they should go into but weren't forced to go into, sometimes you can do that. You can do kind of conversions to try to get information into that format. Um, Often you can't. More of the data is just missing. It's gone. Again, that's why it's really good to start out on the beginning of the pipeline. But to the extent you can complete that data remediation as well. Of course, there's going to be an asterisk on your analysis in the end too. 97% of this data was able to be recovered, 3% wasn't, 50%. Maybe you're dealing with a subset of individuals who were able to submit it, who chose to submit an optional field. There's going to be some bias within that group because they're the ones who took the time to fill out the optional field, while the others didn't. Right. So, you're always dealing with this kind of question that'll come out of that data remediation process or that analysis process. And then lastly, as you can, go take back best practices, be proactive as well in terms of your data pipeline. See if you can get these kind of changes and fixes implemented in advance. Because you may also find that some of these problems are coming from people copying a database and going and dealing with their data analysis disconnected from the database, or you have different sources of truth because you're passing around an old and a new and a really new version of your database. And that can also be where some of these errors are coming from. So to be able to follow this from the beginning of the data pipeline all the way to that end data analysis process can help you remediate some of these questions about how are you achieving those business goals as well, right? And that's all that we have for the presentation content. We have questions. I know there's a lot of things coming in the chat, so I'll respond to these real quick. Um, yeah, we got some questions about Tableau. Cool. Ran into a problem with manual data fixing by multiple people who are knowledgeable but not true DBAs. It took a bit for a true DBA to fix the mess. Yeah, yeah. If you are doing data remediation by hand, it can be a huge time sink, and there you probably want to figure out exactly how long you think it's going to take, and then multiply that out by the number of, fixes that you're actually talking about. Because often for things like PDFs, I mean, if someone submitted a handwritten paper form, there's a I mean, yeah, there's better and worse tools you can use to try to OCR your way out of it, but there's always a cost to that. And there's always a cost in terms of real people's time to doing that. So yeah, I mean, the more you can get the system to be really precise up front, the better. The manual involvement with data is it's a bummer. So yeah, if you can avoid it, it's much better off. Yeah.
All right. If anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get you unmuted so you can ask. Rob, when you're starting to work with someone, what's the first challenge you normally have in getting a project started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think often we want to make sure that everyone's getting their voices heard, which is not really, it's not a tech answer, let's say. This is more of the human project management answer. But as I mentioned earlier on, everyone has expertise about something. I mean, even if you're coming in fresh to a new role and you've never been in a certain area of your government and you're just starting out, you're seeing something with new eyes, and that's also, that's unique. That's something that should be listened to. So just really making sure that people feel like they're valued in terms of being contributors and their own expertise to the project is so important. And often it takes a little bit of like, just a kind of real talk at the beginning of the project, just saying, hey, like we're in this because we want to make something great. We know that you're in this because you want to serve Coloradans. Like, let's do that together and let's hear what you have to say. I think that's that icebreaker moment to being able to connect with people is it's I wouldn't say it's a challenge necessarily, but it's something that we pay really close attention to because it's really important to make sure that people are feeling invested in that final output.
That is awesome. Thank you. Any other closing thoughts before we go?
I don't think anything on our end.
Well,
I wanted to follow up though, maybe with one overall kind of thank you also for attending. This is the first time we've done this webinar. We are a new SIPA vendor. It's our first year, so we're really thrilled to have this chance also to present to y'all and get your comments and questions to chat too. So thank you very much.
and thank you, Ben. That was very nice. All right. Well, we're finishing up. So again, please don't hesitate to contact any of us if you have any follow-up questions that pop up after this. If you want to learn more, have a more discovery type call with Rob and Andrew, or if you want to get a quote because you want to do something. Please keep an eye out. We've got future webinar Wednesdays getting scheduled. Our next one will be on December 3rd with Gartner Incorporated, who will be joining us to talk about practical strategies and AI evaluations to maximize value in your budget in order to optimize sourcing and spend, which is going to be an important topic here in our restricted budget environment that we're in. We're also getting our 2026 regional workshops organized and would love to have you join us for those as well. You'll find links to register for any of our events on sipa.colorado.gov, and be sure to subscribe to and read through our monthly newsletter to keep up with upcoming events and news, find other services that we can help you procure, and receive useful accessibility and cybersecurity resources. If you want to return to this webinar or view it again or share it with a colleague, we'll be processing and uploading this video to SIPA's YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that. And finally, we want to make these webinars as relevant and informational as possible. So we deeply appreciate if you could take a minute and fill out the brief 3-question survey following the webinar. Thank you again for being with us this morning and make it a fantastic day.